Techniques we discuss here are meant for licensed wildlife professionals. If you aren't licensed and trained for wildlife rehabilitation, do not attempt to capture, hold, or rehabilitate any wild animal. If you find an injured wild animal, a wildlife professional can recommend next steps. Welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation, Rescue to Release, a podcast dedicated to licensed wildlife rehabilitators and the veterinarians who support them. I'm your host, Gail Buell. We'll tackle topics about rescue, care, management, reconditioning, and releasing wildlife found in North America. This is a deep dive into each subject. We hope to give rehabilitators information they can use because they're already going to great lengths to rescue and nurse animals back to health. An injured or orphaned wild animal's journey to restored health and independence in their natural habitat is delicate and complex. We draw techniques and expertise from many disciplines. Many animals brought into rehabilitation cannot be saved. The last gift we can give them is humane euthanasia. We will talk more about when this is necessary. Sometimes animals are deemed non-releasable and evaluated to be suitable for a life in captivity. When that happens, we shift to a long-term approach to managing their care, training, and housing. Some such animals serve as ambassador animals, a term for the animals that rehabilitators use to educate the public. Each episode will speak with experts who represent specialty topics across the profession of wildlife rehabilitation, ambassador animal care and management, showcasing best practices. Welcome back. This is the second part of my discussion with Debbie Sykes, a Nashville-based wildlife rehabilitator who specializes in caring for white-tailed deer fawn. In this brief episode, we cover more on the white-tailed deer natural history, when it's appropriate or not to take in a fawn, and how rehabilitators triage calls about potentially orphaned fawns. Let's go ahead and start talking about how fawns end up coming to a rehabilitator.
Yeah, I think rehabilitators coined the term "put it back" to talk about healthy fawns that people love to bring in. We already touched on the subject that moms like to or have to leave their babies for hours at a time, sometimes coming back once or twice, sometimes maybe coming back 3 times, very rarely. But people see them, they want to help them. Usually what happens is they bring them inside, feed them, and then call a rehabilitator. Or, you see a fawn on the side of the road, and up the road, maybe there's a dead deer. So people believe that potentially that was the mom and she was killed. It is very difficult. They are very cute, adorable, naive little things. It's very hard to convince somebody to trust you to put that fawn back to just make sure that it truly is orphan.
So let's start there, because I do think that Bambi syndrome is something reserved for white-tailed deer, and it's those big brown eyes and spots or whatever. I mean, they are, and there's no denying it. They are really cute.
Yeah.
So I call you up. Let's take that first scenario. I saw a fawn. I assume it's an orphan. I bring it home. We'll talk about the fact that I fed it cow's milk in a minute and then call you. So in that situation, what do you do? Or let's make it easier. I didn't feed it anything. I did bring it home.
I love it. I love that you just called a rehabber beforehand. I will almost always empathize with the person. It is scary to be out there and think that you found this animal that lost its mom, and you don't know anything about this animal other than it lost its mom. So I always try to remember that they're trying to do the best thing for the animal and start from there. I will usually explain the natural history a little bit, just that if moms took them everywhere, then they're more likely to be predated upon. So that's why she leaves them We check for fly eggs. I'll usually ask for a picture, and so I can assess dehydration. Are their eyes bright and alert, or are they kind of sinking? Do they look lethargic, which can be confusing for fawns. A lot of times when they are waiting for their mom, they're kind of laying down with their head down, and you'll see that in captivity as well. So if somebody takes them to their home, they might be laying down, but there is a difference between laying down with their eyes shut and being lethargic, which I'm sure you as a behavior expert want to know exactly what the body language.
Sure, if you want to explain it to me.
What I do, it is a lot of what is their body condition? Do they look thin? Does their fur look kind of slick, or does it look like it maybe has something wrong with it, I guess, so to speak? And their ears as well. A lot of people say that if their ears are folded, I think.
Yeah, I've heard
that is not something that I found to be true. So that's just like, okay, great. So I know it used to go around quite a bit. There's a Facebook infographic that gets tossed around that just says if their ears are folded, they need to come in, but that's not true at all. And trying to think if there's anything else that I would use to determine lethargy.
Since cell phone technology has been wonderful for helping to assess. So do you teach the finder, the caller, how to do the skin tint test at all?
No, because with babies, I think it's not as cut and dry when we're dealing with young versus old. I'll usually just assess it myself. They're already in the baby's face. Nobody's like putting it in a bathroom and, so just getting a picture of the face, of the overall body, of the butthole, which was really fun when we had to ask a pastor to do that, just to make sure, again, there's no fly eggs or anything like that in between the hooves. Sure. And we try, we do our best. We check in with them. If it's 3:00, we haven't put them out, we check in with them again at 9. We also make sure to tell them mom's not going to come back if a predator's just chilling out right there. So make sure you go inside the house and either come back to check it after dusk or watch it from your window.
Okay. So do you have in the scenario that we just posed, and I, as the caller, put that fawn back, do you say, okay, or is it dependent on the situation where, okay, I want you to go in a couple hours and check if that fawn is still there? Or do you say, I want you to go back in 24 hours? How do you play with that?
That is a good question. And it does depend a lot on the situation. If it's we have a lot of neighborhoods with barking dogs. And for one example, the fawn was left kind of near a barking dog, and we had to bring the dog in. And and this is me, just putting actions into this. But because it wasn't like a good situation, I believe the mom took the baby with her to find a new location. If it's a little bit more of a safe location, I'm sure they're more likely to leave it in that location. Mm-hmm. But really, I want a picture the next day if it is in the same location. Most of the time I found within 24 hours, if they're not truly orphaned, the mom will move it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you found the same thing where you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely depends on the situation, but most often it's that 24-hour period is crucial. And moms, and even if you're trying, you needed to bring the animal into care for a tiny little bit, but you think you can get it back out. You have up to, I think, 48 hours before the milk starts drying up. So we've had really good luck reuniting. If we've got some really good finders or callers that are really observant and knows the doe is around, we've been able to reunite, which is great.
Are you reuniting at dawn or dusk or in the middle of the day, or?
Boy, it really depends on where it is. It's usually a little bit later, but not quite dark, because we want to be able to watch. Like from the inside of the house, it's really hard when it's dark out. But it depends definitely depends on the situation. If I think I've got a fawn that's going to wander versus one that will stay fairly where we want them to stay, because I don't want them wandering across the road or anything like that, right, until they reunite. So excellent. So that was a simple scenario, right? And maybe the best of all. What other scenarios have callers given you?
I've had to come out there before, send volunteers out, just because they were very panicked and they didn't want to do it, which to me is ultimately worth it, because you're either looking at about 3 months of fawn rehab to one night, 4 hours with this hysterical person. It's just such a good trade-off. So worst case scenario, going out there. Of course, if you're a high volume center dealing with a lot of these, it's going to be different than somebody. I mean, I get maybe 10 calls a day, and and Nashville Wildlife Conservation is not a big center, but we're able to handle that, versus Walden's Puddle, like I mentioned before, they're seeing 3,000 animals a year. They're getting 30, 40 phone calls a day, so they're not able to manage that. But I bet if you had you asked for a group of volunteers that would go help reunite fawns with their mothers, they would totally appreciate that.
They would appreciate it. Right. Especially, because a group of trained volunteers could take on some of that burden. So that's great. Is there are there situations that you've come across over and over and over again, throughout the years with dealing with callers or things like that you're like, oh, please, if this was one thing that I could really get out to the public about, don't do this?
I mean, it's just leave them alone. That's always it. Just leave them alone. We try to be pretty proactive about social media. Come what March, usually we start to see them around May. So if we can do a big push, and that's one of the things I plan on doing this year, is making sure putting up things at coffee shops. Like I mentioned, I'm in the city, we see a lot of them. We had 3 people who saw 3 separate houses that saw a fawn and brought it in, fed it milk, and we were able to talk it into putting it back out. But if you can reach people in a coffee shop, if somebody posts on Facebook or social media, I found this fawn, I don't know what to do, they have the information, or at least they know who to call. Like, oh yeah, I saw this in a coffee shop or whatever, because you just post a picture of a cute fawn and everybody's going to look at it, and then you give them that information. So I'm hoping the proactive approach is the best approach that we have. I'm a big proponent, I'm sure as you are, of educating the public, because that's our first line of defense.
It is our first line of defense. I find, and social media, I think, is a wonderful tool, but it also is a difficult tool, because people put out things that other people, of course, find just very cute, like the video of
Dodo.
I'm not mentioning names of any.
Oh, whoops.
But the fawn playing with the dogs or those kinds of things. And that's, of course, because it pulls at your heartstrings because, oh my gosh, that is like Bambi. Oh my gosh, I'm in touch with the wild or whatever. And do you ever have either situations like that or feel like you have to, do people forward you those things and they say, well, isn't this cute? And you're like, well,
all the time. And we did get back at Walden's Puddle quite a bit of confiscated deer towards the early fall where they're a little bit older. They'd have the collars on them or they'd come on a leash, different things like that. And those were always very difficult cases that we found. It's pretty hard at that point to wild up those guys. So every time I see one of those videos, that's what I think about is having to euthanize Bambi.
Oh, and then that's so difficult. It is so difficult. I think you're right. As much proactive stuff as you can do to prevent, even if you prevent even one of those, I think then you've been successful. So
yeah, the amount of work that has to go into raising one is quite a bit. So.
It is.
This was part 2 of my talk with rehabilitator Debbie Sykes. Next episode, we do a deep dive into the rehabilitation process for white-tailed deer fawn. Debbie and I discuss when euthanasia is appropriate versus rehabilitation, a sometimes very tough choice. And we'll go into detail about caring for fawns and rehabilitation, from early stabilization to release. Debbie's expertise really shines through, so we hope you'll tune in.
This was another episode of Wildlife Rehabilitation Rescue to Release. We're glad you joined us today. Wildlife Rehabilitation Rescue to Release is a production of Partners for Wildlife, working hand in hand with wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians to improve the welfare of orphaned, ill, and injured wildlife. Our executive producer is me, Gail Buell. I'm the partnership coordinator for Partners for Wildlife at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine's Raptor Center. Our producer is Kirk Clockey. To learn more about the Raptor Center and Partners for Wildlife, visit raptor.umn.edu. Are you interested in becoming a licensed wildlife rehabilitator? Visit the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association website at nwrawildlife.org for resources to get started. And remember, if you do find an injured or orphaned animal, please contact a licensed wildlife rehabilitator in your area. And that's our show. Hope you'll join us next time.